This is Kent Hance, best storyteller in Texas. We have today a guest. It's a good friend of mine, a longtime friend of long standing, and Sam Middleton. He's with Charles Middleton and Son. They specialize in selling ranches, and every time I see him, I said, "Have you got one ranch left?" He'll say, "Yeah, we got one left, and it's got your name on it." He's a good sales guy, knows what he's doing. Sam, thanks for being on the show.
Hi, Kent. How are you?
I'm doing good. We usually start off the show with a saying, and one that your parents, especially your dad, told you about ranches and whether you sell them or not, I think is really good. And share that wisdom with us that your dad gave you.
Well, I followed my dad around in this business for many years, and one thing he taught me that I remember that has really proven to be true, and it's somewhat sad, but he always told me, he said, "Son, if these old ranch families taught their kids to stay on the ranch and not go to town, but stay on the ranch and work on the ranch, we'd starve to death in this business." But that's proven to be very true. These second and third generations, usually they've lost the sentimental attachment to these properties, and they decide to sell them. And that's where I've had some good success, is selling properties that have been under a fairly long ownership, and the families have lost the interest in the ranch and they want the money.
Sam, you've sold some of the biggest ranches in the history of this nation. And just thinking through, you sold the Waggoner Ranch, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The Four Sixes, sold Boone Pickens Ranch, many others. But you've seen a lot of people and a lot of buyers, and that in your book, and Sam has a book. Let's talk just a second about the book. The book is Swapping Dirt.
Yes, sir.
And do what?
Yes, sir.
And anyway, in that book, he tells about. I got the book, and I'd set out to read 3 or 4 chapters every night, small chapters, a few pages, but it let me relax and take my mind off my worries. And so I'd read those, and I'd look up, and all of a sudden I'd read 10 or 20 chapters. So I got through the book pretty fast, but there was some humorous stories in there, and I think of one of the most humorous was the guy that was going to buy that ranch that was north of Abilene, and
Yes, sir.
what was it, Jeffrey or
Jeremy. The
Jeremy?
the title of that story was Young Jeremy.
Young Jeremy, he was ready to load up and buy. Was it 45,000 acres?
41,000 acres.
41,000 acres. That shows Sam's got a great memory in that he remembered exactly what it was. But to buy 41,000 acre ranch, you got to have a little money. You got to have some stability. And
Well,
this
that
guy
ranch
called you.
is over $1,000 an acre.
It was how much?
It's a little over $1,000 an acre, so
Yeah,
it's over $40 million. Yes, sir.
yeah. So you figure a guy that's going to buy a ranch for $40 million is a major player. And tell us about young Jeremy.
Well, I had this ranch for sale, and it was a historic ranch. It's called the Swenson Ranch. It'd been in the same family since the 1800s. And I got a call one day from a lady real estate broker in Idaho. And she called me and she said, "I represent a client that is extremely wealthy. He's extremely private. I can't tell you his name. You're going to have to sign a confidentiality agreement. But this guy is big rich, and he's interested in the Swenson Ranch." And so I said, "That's fine." She emailed me a confidentiality agreement. And So all I knew was his name was Jerry. And she called me and she said she wanted me to come to Fort Worth and meet with Jeremy, and she was going to fly down from Idaho. And she said, I've done a lot of business with this man. And she said, but I don't know anything about Texas ranches. She said, I'm in the city real estate business. And she said, I want to represent him, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. And I told her, I said, well, you might consider hiring somebody that's a ranch broker that can work with you as a buyer's broker. And she said, do you know somebody that could do that? And I said, yeah, there's a guy in Abilene named Butch Nelson. And I hooked them up together, and she went into the deal with Butch together to represent Jeremy. So I took off to Fort Worth and stopped at Abilene, picked Butch up, and we drove to Fort Worth. And we were going to meet at the Merrill Lynch office in Fort Worth. So we went up the elevator to their office. The elevator door opened up, and here is this young guy walking by the elevator, and he's got flip flops on and shorts and a t shirt and a ball cap, about a 25-year-old kid, young man. And he turns as the elevator opens up, and he looks and he said, you must be Sam Middleton. I said, yes, I am. He said, follow me. So Butch and I followed him to the conference room, sat down, and he left, and he said, I'll be back shortly. He came back in and sat down. We visited, and I said, we're supposed to meet a guy here named Jeremy. He said, well, I'm Jeremy. And I was pretty surprised that this kid in flip-flops was Jeremy. And about that time, a lady with Merrill Lynch came in and handed Butch and me about a 40-page prospectus about Jeremy investing $186 million with them, and how they were going to manage this money, and what it was going to be worth hypothetically in 10 years, but it showed an initial deposit of $186 million. So I thought, well, this guy can swing the deal. About that time, this lady broker from Idaho comes in the conference room, and I was surprised to find out she had never even met Jeremy before. Now, she had told me she'd done all this business with him, but they had never even met face to face. But anyway, we visited about the ranch, and he said he wanted to come look. So we set up a date. And so he said he was going to meet Butch in Abilene, and they'd come out to the ranch, which is about 40 miles north of Abilene, to the Swenson office in downtown Stamford. So I lined it up with the ranch manager, and we all met in the office. And Butch came and Jeremy came, the lady from from Idaho came, and we visited. And Butch called me over to the side and he said, Sam, I need to tell you something. I said, what? He said, Jeremy came out here in a Greyhound bus. I thought, what? I said, this guy's wanting to buy a $40+ million ranch, and he comes out in a Greyhound bus. And I said, well, what's the deal with that? And he said, well, I asked him. I thought it was very unusual. And he said, he just likes to ride in a bus because that way he can look out the window and see the scenery and relax. So he said, I picked him up at the bus station, and we came out here. And so I said, well, okay. So anyway, we spent some time that afternoon looking at the ranch, and we went back to Stamford for dinner that night. And he told the lady real estate broker, he said, now you need to pick up the tab on this because you're going to make a big commission when I buy this ranch. So she paid for our dinner. We looked some more the next day, and then he said, I want you to call the owner of the ranch. I want to meet with him to tell him I'm going to buy the ranch. So this was a family ownership, but the chairman of the board was Chris Swenson, and Chris lived in Elgin, Texas, east of Austin. So I called Chris and he said, I'll be out here in the morning. So the next morning, we all show up at the Swenson office again, and we're sitting down to talk. And Jeremy said, excuse me, I've got to make a phone call. He said, I'm making a $25 million donation to Mississippi State University, and I have a conference call with the chancellor and the regents this morning. And you'll have to excuse me. This will take for about 10 or 15 minutes. They're wanting to set up a time for me to come to honor me for this huge donation. So he goes in the next office and leaves the door open, and he's talking on his cell phone. And I don't know whether he's talking to anybody or just acting like, but you could hear him. Yes, Chancellor. Yes, I'll be there May the 3rd. Yes, and that fine. And I've got a tuxedo, and I'll wear my tux and all this. And yes, I'm happy to make this donation. You can hear this one-sided conversation. He comes back into the room and he said, "Okay, let's look around." He said, and he visited more with Chris, and he said, here's what I want to do. He made an offer that was a very reasonable offer. And Chris said, I think we can work this out. And he said, but what I'd like to do, I'd like to spend a couple of days out here in a ranch house. And I said, well, we do have some vacant houses. And the ranch manager said, that's fine. So we put him up in this ranch house, and then he called, and he's out there for 2 more days. And then he said he wants to go horseback riding, and he's bringing a lady friend. And I didn't know where she was coming from. And so the ranch manager got his 2 most gentle horses, and they got on these horses and rode them around in a circle for about 30 minutes. And you could tell neither one of them had ever been on a horse. And then he told Butch Nelson, he said, Butch, I want to use that side by side, that Polaris side by side, for a couple of days just out here by myself. And he told the ranch manager he wanted to move into the ranch manager's house for a couple of days. So the ranch manager said, okay, we've got a spare bedroom. So he moves into the ranch manager's house. The ranch manager's wife is cooking for him. He's out there driving around in this Polaris, and this all of a sudden he disappears. And we can't find him. We don't know where he went to or anything else. And he left Butch's Polaris out there in the middle of the pasture, out of gas, and all muddy and torn up, and he's gone. And so we do some more checking on him, and we contact Merrill Lynch in Fort Worth, and we find out that he had conned them also. He had asked them to put this prospectus together, 186 million, and he was going to look at it, and then he would fund the deal, but it was never funded. He used that prospectus to make everybody think he had all this money, and all he did was spend about 8 days out there on that ranch for free, and he left, and we've never heard from him since.
So you would say, beware of a buyer of a $40 million ranch that shows up on a Greyhound bus.
Greyhound bus, don't start spending your commission yet.
Well, the lady from Idaho, she picked up the tab because she's going to make a big
I
commission.
felt sorry for her, but she more or less really misrepresented her association with him because she was telling me she'd done all this business with him. She'd never even met the guy before. You know?
That's amazing. One of the ranches you've sold within the last 10 years was the Waggoner Ranch. And
Yes,
that
sir.
was 540 something thousand acres, wasn't it?
535,000.
535. Is that larger than Rhode Island?
I can't remember. I think it's pretty similar in size to Rhode Island, but I wasn't the only broker on it. There were three brokers involved, but I was fortunate to be part of that deal. But it took three brokers to get that done, and but it was a huge transaction.
Our law firm was involved. It was near the end of the year, and the Secretary of State had to be available to have some of the closing documents. And the Underwood law firm, big firm
Yep.
in Amarillo, had called us and got us involved. And tell us a little about the buyer on that and how you got involved in the sale of the Waggoner Ranch.
Well, the way I got originally involved was there was two families that owned the ranch, and both families were really good people, but a typical situation where they didn't get along. But there were no bad guys in this deal. Both families were good, solid people, but they just didn't. They had different ideas, and they couldn't get along together. And so the ranch had been turned over to a court-appointed receiver, and his name was Mike Baskerville, a local attorney there in Vernon. And Mike's a really good guy and really had a sincere, uh, uh, he was really sincere about trying to get this property sold. That they've been trying to sell it for 30 years, but nobody could get along, and they wouldn't ever price the ranch or anything else. And so Mike called me and he said, I'd like to put you on retainer to help get this thing prepared to put on the market because I can't get anything accomplished. I have to go through the courts on every issue to get this thing ready to market. He said, we don't have a legal description or we don't have a survey. We don't have, and you've got to have all that. And he said, can you come testify before the judge to show that we need to get these things done to move forward? So I was up there testifying in court quite a few times on things like getting title policies ready, title commitments, and surveys and all that done in order to get the ranch on the market. And then, so they decided to list it with me and another fellow named Bernie Utrix, and we jointly listed it. And Bernie and I had total different styles, but he was from Australia, and he was a real promoter type. And he told everybody, he said, now Sam's the steak and I'm the sizzle. And that's kind of the way it was. But anyway, together we teamed up and we sold that ranch to, we showed it over 50 times. And one thing that was a real eye opener for me, we showed that place to 15 or 16 folks from foreign countries. And many times we had to have an interpreter, and that makes a tough day when everything goes through an interpreter. But I would be with people. We had people from South Korea, India, uh, Australia, Argentina, Canada, Mexico, Ethiopia, France, Spain. I'm talking about all over the world. Come to look at this thing, and most everyone didn't have a clue about what this ranch was doing, or they didn't understand it. And I would ask them, I said, what brings you over here to look at this property? And it was priced at $725 million. And every one of these foreign people would say, because the United States is the best place in the world to invest money. Now, we think we have problems, but they feel like the United States is the gold star, and
It's the safest place to have money.
yes, yes.
And we get down on ourselves sometimes. But I used to people tell me that these other countries don't like Americans and everything. When I was in Congress and we'd go to visit some country, they treated us like we were royalty. I mean, they just it could not be nice enough. And there was a group of us sent to Central America to Nicaragua after that revolution, and we got down there and the security people for Congress just went nuts. They didn't want us to get off the plane. And they probably had 30, 40,000 people at the airport to meet us. And they had that revolution, and some people had on Boy Scout uniforms and a machine gun, and somebody have a shotgun and a polo shirt, and I mean it was unbelievable. But they wanted to know more about America and
Right.
Americans,
Right.
and so you did a big job on showing that many times,
Yes, sir.
especially through an interpreter. But you
Yes, sir.
finally found a buyer, and he was an American.
Yes, sir. Stan Kroenke. And Stan is a really fine guy. And he came in, we showed him the ranch. He brought in a team of people and did a very detailed study on the books. And this was a turnkey deal. Minerals, the oil company, the farming operation, all of the equipment, all of the cattle. They had a big office in Vernon. So the office building, I mean, it was furniture, paintings, bronzes, everything. You just walk in, hand over the keys. And because it was a court ordered sale, you could not have a due diligence or a contingency on the and and for a deal of that size, we had to sign a confidentiality agreement. I can't disclose the price, but I can tell you the listing price was 725 million. But for a deal of that magnitude, with absolutely no out at all, I can say that there was 60 million in escrow that was non-refundable. Well, when you're putting up that kind of money and you have no way to get out and if you do, you walk away with a $60 million loss. You have to have some pretty big assurance that everything's going to come together and work. And Stan did a lot of preliminary due diligence before we went into contract. But once he went into contract, uh, we went into contract in November of 2015 and closed the sale in February of 2016. So it was a pretty quick close and everything, but it was a huge transaction. And since that time, I've done other business with Stan. He's been a real fine gentleman to do business with, and he's got a great team that works for him.
He owns the L.A. Rams.
He owns the Los Angeles Rams, and he owns the Denver Nuggets basketball team, and he owns the Colorado Avalanche hockey team, and he owns a soccer team in Europe called the Arsenal soccer team. And I'll tell you a funny story. When I was during COVID, when all these pro sports were shut down, if you remember, everything was shut down because of social distancing and everything. And I was with him one day and I said, "What, do you still have to pay these salaries for all these athletes, even though it's shut down?" He said, "Oh, yeah, we still have to pay them." And I said, "Man, that must be a heavy load paying those football players and basketball players as much as they make." He said, "They don't make anything compared to those European soccer players." He said, "That's where the big money is." And I never had even thought about that.
Well, he saw some pretty big salaries out there, no
Oh, yeah.
question about that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now, his wife was a Walton
Yes, sir. Yes,
and
sir.
and the Walmart, so they had money coming from both sides,
Both sides. Yes, sir.
and but good, fine people to deal with.
Really nice guy. And he had his own broker, a guy named Joel Ledbetter, and Joel was a really good guy to work with. And I knew Joel already, and so it was a real good fit.
Well, that was historic, to say the least. How long had that ranch been in the family?
I think it was since like 1860 56 or 60, something like it. It been like close to 150 years, I think.
Wow, that's a long time. A long time to say the least. You also sold another famous ranch in West Texas, the Matador Ranch.
Yes, sir.
And now the Koch brothers owned the Matador Ranch,
Yes, sir.
and they were out of Kansas.
Yes, sir. Wichita, Kansas.
Yeah.
And that ranch was 131,000 acres. We
And
sold that about
you sold that in
2 or 3
pieces,
years
didn't
ago.
you?
Yes, sir. It wasn't all contiguous, and we sold it in 5 tracts. Uh, Typically, those tracts were 25,000 to 40,000 acre tracts.
Well, I know my friend W.R. Collier had part of that and had the headquarters,
He
and
bought the
I think they
headquarters.
still do some hunting and they have a nice place to have a conference center with your employees and get away and that's the old headquarters of the Matador Ranch,
A
and
lot of
they
history.
run a good organization if somebody wants to
Yes,
have a meeting there.
yes, sir. They got a nice lodge there. Yes, sir.
Yeah. If you want to have a meeting, get away from everything. They'll certainly be
Yeah.
getting away from everything. You had the Joe Kirk Fulton. You did some work with him and RH,
Well,
and
not with RH, but just with Joe Curtis. Yes, sir.
RH had already passed along before y'all.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
RH was a guy that was the most unusual guy I ever dealt with in politics. And Boone Pickens and I used to tell R.H. Fulton stories, and people always get a big laugh. But R.H. would smoke, and he'd put the cigarettes on the desk. He'd
Oh,
just throw them
yeah.
out. He wouldn't set them out. He'd let them burn down, and he'd just throw them on the desk. And every night they'd sweep the desk, get all those cigarette butts off.
No.
And I don't know. In Boone Pickens' book, he tells about RH that he was needing him to sign a contract, and that he went to see him, and he was at the ranch at Vega, and he wouldn't answer the door. Finally went in and was yelling, RH, where are you? And he told me he was back in the bedroom. And he got back to the bedroom to get him signed the contract, and RH was under the sheets. You couldn't see him. And so Boone talked to him, and he said he had signed the paper, and he signed it, but Boone had to put it under the sheet. Boone never saw him really, but he did attest with a public notary that he saw him sign the paper, or that he witnessed. And so in a roundabout way, Boone said that he did witness
Yeah.
RH signing the
Yeah, he
paper.
told me that story. Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty good. But that was a big ranch up by Vega. It was 100,000 acres or so,
I think it's 145,000 acres. Yes, sir.
and a good ranch.
On the
Down near the
Canadian.
Canadian
Yeah.
or the breaks there, you had a lot of salt cedar, and that salt cedar has been a problem for a lot of ranches.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's a salt cedar tree, and it sucks more moisture out of the ground than you can ever believe.
Yeah, I think they say like a mature salt cedar will suck up like 250 gallons of water a day. It's
Yeah.
a tremendous amount of water, and dries up all those springs and creeks.
Hope you enjoyed part one of my conversation with Sam Middleton on selling and buying ranches. Hope you come back for part two.